All right, hello David, and thanks very much for coming to talk to Ancient Origins.
Hello, April.
A lot of our readers will have definitely heard the name David Icke because you're now world famous for, I suppose, being one of the most outspoken conspiracy theorists in the world. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
No. About the outspoken bit, I suppose, true. And with this new book that's just come out, outspoken goes on to another level. But this whole thing about conspiracy theory is fascinating to me because that phrase and conspiracy theorist came into widespread circulation in the 1960s because of the CIA. The CIA, provable, the documents exist, contacted major media organizations in America and urged them to discredit those that were questioning the Kennedy assassination and other assassinations of the 1960s by calling those people conspiracy theorists and what they were saying conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Now, all these decades later, people like me are called conspiracy theorists by reflex action. And of course, what it's become now, particularly in the mainstream media, is a label of derision. Oh, he's a conspiracy theorist. Well, first of all, the dictionary definition of conspiracy is two or more people conspiring together to bring about a particular end, usually illegal. On that basis, we're drowning in conspiracies. And, you know, a conspiracy theory is, well, this is what I think's going on. That's a theory, fair enough. And there is some of that. There is for sure where you look at situations and you say, well, on the basis of what I'm seeing, I think this could be what's going on. That is a theory. But much of it is provable fact with documented fact. When I was talking about and writing in earlier books about the fact that weapons of mass destruction in Iraq was a lie to justify the invasion of that country, I was told that was a conspiracy theory. But it wasn't, because it's been shown to be true. So I think we have to be careful with the word theory and apply it to genuine theories, but not to documentable evidence showing that something is actually true.
So you're saying there's basically an assumption with the term conspiracy theory that the theory is false, that there's no truth behind it.
No, I'm saying that we can theorize on the basis of the evidence that we have, which in some areas may not be totally conclusive, and we can say, well, I think on the basis of what I'm looking at, this is what is going on. That's a theory.
Yeah.
But much of it is supportable by documented evidence, and it's not a theory. And we shouldn't confuse the two because it discredits that as a theory, which is not a theory.
Yeah, sure. So your latest book, which is coming out a little later this month on the 18th of November, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told. This is probably your most comprehensive publication out of more than 20 that you've already produced, which really compiles almost everything you've said to date, I believe. Everything from politics to human origins, the emergence of ancient civilization, our human condition, almost the meaning of life, where we're going, our future, everything all in one book. Now, being an ancient history site, obviously we want to hear some of your perspectives relating to ancient civilizations and also how that may affect us now in our current state. So firstly, the emergence of civilization. There have been quite a few researchers now that have come out and supported actually what you've said, which is that in the past there was an advanced civilization that existed before what we know as the emergence of civilization around 6,000 years ago in the Middle East. That there was an advanced civilization that existed a long time before that. What can you tell us about this ancient civilization? Where did they come from? What made them disappear?
Where it came from, we can speculate. What seems clear is that this, what I call pre-hijack civilization, was far more advanced than the ones that had followed, and that there was a far greater understanding of the nature of reality itself, the illusory nature of physical reality, the way that everything is one consciousness, and that through that consciousness, what we call human can communicate with animal, can communicate with nature, can communicate with trees, because when you go beyond the physical, everything's connected by this consciousness, what many ancient cultures referred to and gave a name to. One of them is Wakantanka, the force that moves all things, which I think is a great description. What has happened in this hijacked human society, which I'll come to in a second, is that we've overwhelmingly and increasingly lost that understanding that we are, in the end, whatever your race, religion, belief, expressions, points of attention within that same one awareness. And we've been manipulated, I say, by a non-human force into becoming so focused on the five sense level of reality, which is nothing more than the tiniest smear of frequency within the great forever, indeed, even within the totality of what we call the universe, that we have lost touch with true self, conscious self, and we have fallen for the trap of what I call phantom self. This is a self-identity with our name, our life story, our race, our religion, and all the rest of it. And this has created a human myopia, not least in self-identity, that has given us the belief in limitation, in I can't, in I have no power. And what I find fascinating, April, is the correlation of around 6,000 years ago. There was a book, I don't know whether you've come across it, by a British academic called Steve Taylor, called The Fall. And he focuses in there on something that happened around 6,000 years ago, when what he calls a new psyche emerged. A new psyche that was very different to the one before. And he says that this came about after violent invasions of the Middle East by what he calls an Indo-European and Semitic races. And of course, Semitic, people immediately think Jewish, but actually Semitic refers to a language group in the Middle East and North Africa, which is overwhelmingly Arabic languages. And as a result of this change in the psyche, the world changed. Some, cultural historians have said this was the great change. We've never seen a change like it. In the speed in which the psyche changed. Taylor's pointing out that before this 6,000 years ago, there was no male-dominated society as we know it today.
And no ruling elite, I believe, around 6,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, no, kind of everyone has next to nothing, and some people have everything. That society did not exist, he points out, before 6,000 years ago. There was no war as we know it until 6,000 years ago, and everything changed, and changed very quickly. And when you follow this new psyche out of the Middle East from 6,000 years ago, you follow it into Europe, where the new psyche became the ruling classes and the ruling hierarchies of Europe. And of course, then through the European empires, not least the British, this new psyche was exported all over the world and imposed itself on the native cultures of what you might call the old psyche, who looked at the world and looked at reality in a very different way. Some of them who've survived with that psyche, that way of looking at the world. When I was in Australia last year, I spent a few hours with some Aboriginal people in the west of Australia, and although I was coming from what you might call a Western point of view in terms of my research and, of course, my upbringing, both of us were talking the same language and looking at the same perception of what we call history. And as the new psyche took over, the world changed. Suddenly it was about hierarchy of power, hierarchy of control, and then religion came in. This is another interesting aspect, is that Taylor's pointing out that religion, as we know it, didn't start before 6,000 years ago. And where did the major religions come out of? Your Judaism, your Christianity, your Islam, Hinduism too, not far away. It came out of this same area of the world, of the Middle East, where this new psyche came out of. And I'm looking in my books and this new one at a group of interbreeding bloodlines that have passed through history and positioned themselves into the positions of power. These were the bloodlines behind the Roman Empire, the British Empire, the other European empires. And you can chart their movement into Europe out of the same area of the Middle East, because they were hierarchical expressions of this new psyche.
So how do you think this all began, this change to the new psyche? What do you think is responsible for that?
Well, I think that part of it was a breeding program by a non-human force, non-human race, which is also there to be seen in different ancient cultures all over the world.
Are you referring to the Anunnaki?
Well, yeah, when they describe this, I mean, in the Bible, they're describing the sons of God who interbred with the daughters of men. I say that is an expression. And again, you know, I've been to nearly 60 countries researching this. And when you go into Africa and the United States, Native American communities, the shamans around the world that continue with the knowledge, you see this common theme of a non-human manipulating force that messed with human genetics. And so when you look at this is why, you know, I connect so many dots, because there's so many have to be connected to see the picture. What the brain is doing and the genetic structure of the body is processing information. Even the cutting-edge mainstream scientists now are coming to these same conclusions. For instance, that DNA is a receiver-transmitter of information, that the brain is a processor of information and not the origin of that information. It's a processor of it. It's a processor of awareness, what we call consciousness, in an energetic state at the level we interact with it, and it processes that information. Now, if I have this computer in front of me and I program that computer to process information in a certain way, then that is what it will do. And it will put onto the screen an expression of what that programming says it will put on the screen, or even more importantly, or as importantly, not put on the screen. And as we understand more and more about the nature of the fact that the body is a processor of information, which is programmed to process it in a certain way, then if you can change that program, I suggest this is what actually happened with this so-called interbreeding. It processes information in a different way. And how it processes information dictates how we perceive the world.
So
So
you're saying that this breeding program was to create a new race, let's say, of people that maybe didn't have the capacity to use their brain in the potential, to the full potential that they could use it. So they've bred a race that's limited in some way. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. But the point being that the brain is a processor of information. End of story. What information it processes depends on what information you allow it to process. If, for instance, you are someone who has a very narrow band of possibility, sense of the possible, sense of self, sense of your own potential, then that's all you're going to allow your brain to process. And it will do that. And it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy because it will process what you're allowing it to process, and what you think you are becomes the experience of what you are. When you expand your awareness, because awareness is far, far more powerful than genetics if we allow it to be, just as me sitting here is far more powerful than the computer if I control what the computer can, where it can go and what it can decode or not. So as people expand their awareness, this is the old psyche. This is the old psyche that they replaced, where this is what this great change was all about. The psyche before, and among many peoples that still hold on to that psyche, that have come through from ancient cultures, they are expanding their awareness and accessing different levels of perception, of inspiration, of insight, of intuitive knowing, and they're allowing the brain to process that. But what has happened with the new psyche, which is pushed on to what we call now present day, in this illusion again of time, is that people have been manipulated to have a smaller and smaller vision of possibility, while at the same time processing this information to give them the impression that that is actually true, this self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'll give you an example of how this is systematically done, because we can break out of this perception trap any time we choose to expand our awareness. If we don't, we become prisoners of the program. And when we come into the world as children, immediately the programming begins, and it doesn't stop until we leave at the other end. We come into the world, and immediately our perceptions of the possible, our perceptions of self, our perceptions of the world are influenced immediately by parents. And they're not doing it through malevolence. They've been through the process that you're about to go through, and they've accepted that process is true and normal and how things are. And so out of trying to do the best for their children, they start passing this on from the earliest age. The child then goes to what we call education, bravely. And from, again, just a few years old, the child's only just come into the world. From the earliest age, the child is sitting in front of at a desk where an authority figure, a teacher, is telling the child what's right, what's wrong, what is, what isn't, what's history, what's not history, what's right and to be believed and what's not. And this process then goes on throughout a child's formative years until they're well into their teenage years. And again, what are they receiving in that period? They are downloading the state's version of everything. And then they go off and they take exams to see how much of the programming they've absorbed. You've absorbed a lot of it. You're telling us what we told you. Brilliant. You've got a great grade. You're questioning. You're saying, actually, can I ask some questions about this? Ooh, no. Bad grade. Get onto the phone to your mum. Hey, Johnny's asking questions. They'll all want to do it. And then this is the key. Then from this core programming of normal, this narrow band, what I call postage stamp consensus, people go off into the institutions that dictate human society. They go off to be scientists, academics, journalists, doctors, and so on. And through these institutions, they confirm to each other that this download of normal is true. For instance, if a journalist is going to do a story on a particular illness, they're not going to go to an alternative practitioner who may have a wide knowledge of this and great success in treating it. They'll go to a doctor of the psyche that will give them the song sheet version of that disease, and usually what can't be done for it. If they're talking about, they're doing an article on reality, they don't go to someone who studied it for 30 years with an open mind and gone where the information takes them. No, they'll go to a scientist from the system, the psyche, who will then give them the song sheet version. And so people go through life standing on this postage stamp consensus. And anyone that steps off it and challenges it and questions it, they're mad or strange or dangerous or weird.
Well, you talk about the Gnostics, who were actually branded heretics, weren't they, for teaching this kind of information about how to become aware, how to find self-awareness and have knowledge of the world around, and not be, I think they used the term sleepwalkers, that humans are like sleepwalkers and you need to break out of that state. And you mentioned about the Nag Hammadi Library as well, which is 1,600-year-old ancient text, which touches on some of this information as well.
Yeah. What you've raised there is a very, very interesting and fundamental point. See, what I found fascinating in my research over these last nearly 30 years is how, when you look at what the ancients were saying, particularly the expanded awareness among the ancients, they're actually just saying in their own language, which was fitting for their own time, what we're finding now. What I found compelling myself about the Nag Hammadi texts, and for people who haven't come across them, the Gnostics were not a race of people. They were basically a belief system. They had a certain view of the world, and it was an expanded view of the world, I would suggest, from where we look now. And whenever the Gnostics found an area in which they could settle and speak their truth and circulate their version of reality, the church, the Roman Church, was in there, usually with violence, to put an end to it. It was the Gnostic belief system that ran the great or royal library of Alexandria, that great depository of vast numbers of ancient texts and scrolls, giving us a detailed understanding of what the ancients, how they perceived the world, and another version of history. That was destroyed, because information is vital. If you're going to control people, especially on a big, vast scale, you have to control the information they receive, because what governs people's behavior? It's their perceptions. Why someone does that or doesn't do that, says that or doesn't say that, is based on their perceptions of the situation that they're involved in. Control perception, you control the person. Control the perceptions of humanity, you control the world. This is the game. And religion, of course, is a fantastic way, I call it the greatest form of mind control ever invented, to dictate perception by dictating what people have to believe or else. And it was else for century after century after century. And what the Gnostics were saying is, hold on a second, there is another way of looking at this. And so the Roman Church was in there, sent the boys in to destroy them. And of course, what's happening today, just as a quick aside, but a very important one, is instead of having today, religious armies going in to silence people. They have Google and Facebook and YouTube that are now using algorithms to stop people seeing information that's challenging the norm. Look through history, whether it's the ancients or whether it's now, the themes of what has happened and is happening are exactly the same. Control information, you control perception. Control perception, you control the person and the world if you do it globally. So it looked like after the destruction of the Gnostic people, certainly in the public arena, leading to horrors like the siege of Montségur Castle in southern France, when Gnostic thinkers were burned at the stake, known as Cathars, by the Roman Church. It looked like any kind of real detailed knowledge of what the Gnostics thought had been lost. And then in 1945, someone in a place called Nag Hammadi, about 80 miles north of Luxor on the Nile in Egypt, found this earthen jar, and inside was this treasure trove of Gnostic writings, which it's estimated were possibly put in that jar and hidden around 400 AD, which would fit with the destruction of the Royal Library in Alexandria, or one part of the destruction.
So you think that these writings had actually been part of the Library of Alexandria, and that they were stored away somewhere to keep them safe when the destruction was going on?
I think there's a very, very good chance, because, of course, the great library was in Alexandria in Egypt, and the Nag Hammadi find was in Egypt, and the time kind of fits. It's in the same time period anyway. And the great, well, two things, two really, really compelling things about these Nag Hammadi texts. One, unlike religious texts that have been in the public arena through the ages, they've not been in a position to be changed and messed with. Who put them there? Yeah. Put them there in the state that we're now reading them. So that is very compelling. But the other thing is, before I came across the Nag Hammadi texts, it was only a few years ago now, I had come through my other research in other areas and from other sources and in other parts of the world. I'd come to certain conclusions about what the heck has gone on and is going on. And so when I read these texts, I've got them in total behind me there somewhere in a couple of 3 books. I found it extraordinary how it fitted with the conclusions that I'd come to. And they were putting it in their language, and I found it very compelling. And something like 1/5 of these writings referred to a non-human force, which they called the formless ones, which they called archons, or rulers in their language. And how this, I'll call it archontic force, was the creator of this reality that we call the world. And that true reality, the kingdom, was beyond it. And that the Old Testament God, which kind of fits with its tyrant nature, was actually an expression of this archontic force. And what I've done in Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told is to take, early in the book, the Nag Hammadi writings and the Gnostic descriptions using their language of their time, where they talked about this archontic force making a bad copy of original reality, and then played it out in modern day computer language, if you like. Because one of the things I've written about for many, many years, going back to about 2003, is the fact that I suggest we live in the equivalent of a virtual reality game or simulation. Again, what I find very interesting, and the last 12 months particularly, is the number of mainstream scientists who are coming out, and people in the Silicon Valley area who are coming out and saying it does look like we live in a simulation. Among them is a guy called Rich Terrell, who's a NASA computer scientist, who has concluded that we live in a holographic simulation, which is how I've described it.
Like a matrix type.
A matrix type reality. And of course, what comes from that is that if that's the truth, then someone created it.
So what's the basis of that conclusion? What evidence is there for this view?
Well, I cover that in the book, but I mean, you get some real woes when you realize that according to mathematic experts and other people that work in computation, that the physics of our world is basically the physics of computer games. That the mathematics of our world is basically the mathematics of computer games. And what I'm saying in this book is that, in fact, if you take the descriptions of the fake reality that they say this, the Gnostics say this archontic force created to maintain humanity in an ongoing perceptual prison, I'm saying what they were describing in our language is this simulation, which is actually doing the same. And, we think we live in a world that is external to us. We don't. We live in an information source. And if you change the information source that what I call the biological body computer is processing, then the reality that we decode that information into will change. If I change the information source going into this computer in front of me, what appears on the screen will change. Now let's look at how we decode reality. What I'm saying is that base reality is not what we see. It's a waveform information construct. It's like a quantum field of possibility and probability, which we are interacting with. I call it the cosmic internet. That's why there's so many levels of this universe that break down into numbers, that break down into electrical systems and electromagnetic systems, etc. It's because it's a construct. In the simplest terms, although really very close to accuracy in theme, we are interacting with this cosmic internet, which is like a computer interacting with Wi-Fi. If there's Wi-Fi in this room, where is it? Where is it? No one can see it. But the Wi-Fi would take a whole global reality called the World Wide Web in the unseen in this room, and it would put it on that screen in front of me in a completely different form to what it is in the Wi-Fi level, which is just waveform information. So when you look at video games, and they put on the gloves, and they put on the headset, and they put on the headphones, what are they doing? What is happening here? Information from the video game is being communicated to the five senses in codes, electricity, electromagnetism, information. The senses are turning that information into electrical information, and they're communicating it to the brain, which decodes it into digital holographic information, which is the illusion of the world that we think is outside of us. And we, therefore, those that play these games, are taking part in an exercise in which the information from the game is overriding normal reality and causing the body decoding system through the five senses and the brain to decode a different source of information to what it would normally decode. It's hacking into the senses. It's hacking into the brain. That's what virtual reality games are doing. In fact, in a number of and gathering numbers of hospitals around the world, in burns units, when they're changing dressings, which is of course very painful, they're putting people on these virtual reality games to trick the brain into perceiving another reality to override the pain that they would normally feel with the dressings being changed. Now let's bring this back. These video games are overriding the way that we, second by second, are decoding this reality we perceive to be the physical world. The very same systems through which we play and perceive video games, more and more sophisticated they become, is the very system through which we decode reality. We are picking up information from this quantum field of possibility and probability, this cosmic internet construct. And the senses are turning that waveform information into electrical information. They're communicating it to the brain, and different parts of the brain specialize in decoding different senses. Everything that we're looking at now, wherever we are, only exists in that form in a few centimeters at the back of the brain where the brain decodes visual reality. And so this reality is inside of us. It's not outside of us. The illusion is it's outside of us. And
so this is a very, I would say, a very complex theory to digest, quite a hard one to swallow, but let's assume for the moment that it's the correct theory.
Well, let's just say this very quickly, April. I'm giving you if you like, a quick summary of where I'm coming from, but that's not where it ends. That's not where it ends in the book. That's not where it ends in other books. It's supported by tremendous amounts of information. You've got mainstream scientists now who are concluding exactly what I've just described. We are
would you say
reality we think is outside of us is actually just being decoded by the brain, which brings us to this point very quickly. If you can control the information that people are receiving, if you can control that video game information, if you like, you can get the target population to decode a reality that is under your control. And what I'm saying is that this is what the Gnostics were describing when they were talking about the creation of this fake reality and the way that humans were controlled by it and are controlled by it, continues to this day.
Would you say that this information that was taught by the Gnostics survived through some of the secret societies over the centuries into the Knights Templars and the Freemasons and some of the other groups that have continued to hold on to information that is a bit unreachable by the general population?
Well, when you follow the story of secret societies, you go back to the mystery schools. There were a lot of people originally who were passing on this knowledge through these mystery schools that were doing it for very benevolent reasons. They wanted to keep the knowledge alive. Because when this new psyche came in, and that which controlled the new psyche, they wanted to suck this out of circulation. I mean, let's go back briefly to those colonial powers of the new psyche. They go off in all directions all over the world, to Australia and New Zealand and Africa and South America and North America. And what did they do? They wanted to destroy or that which was driving that colonialism. They wanted to destroy the ancient knowledge and those who were carrying it. Look what they did to the Native Americans. Look what they did in South America. Credo Mutwa, the Zulu shaman, who's in his 90s now, and has an incredible knowledge of African history. He said to me many years ago, when the British came into South Africa, all they wanted to do was find out what the shaman knew and then kill them, because they didn't want this information passed on. They wanted people to, in effect, forget this information, not have access to it. And Manly P. Hall, a very famous Freemasonry historian in America, many of his books that I've read, describes how these mystery schools were taken over, infiltrated, and hijacked by those that wished to stop this information being circulated outside of their control. And from this came this global now secret society network, where it's very hierarchical. You've got secret societies in the shadows that no one's ever heard of, which are incredibly exclusive and know what is going on. And then you have other secret societies, which by their very nature are fiercely compartmentalized. If you look at the Freemasons, for instance, the vast majority of Freemasons in the world are in the bottom three levels of degree. What is a degree? Level of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry has 33 degrees. And when you get up to the 33rd degree, there's a 33rd degree that just stays there and thinks it's at the top of the hierarchy. I've had this from high Freemasons. And there's another 33rd degree that goes into another level of this structure, which the vast overwhelming majority of Freemasons don't even know exist. And it's at that structure where the secret societies that we've heard of feed very, very selective people into this upper level above them, which is not to officially existing. That's where the real knowledge is, and everything else is compartmentalized. So the number of people that are aware of exactly what's going on is very, very few. And when you then look at, as I've described, the download of the sense of normal that dominates academia and science and medicine and all of it, that program is a defense mechanism to stop people opening their minds wide enough to start looking at this other way of perceiving the world. They stay in the trap. They stay in the box. And it's called the intellect. We worship the intellect. The intellect is said to be intelligence. It's not. Real intelligence is beyond the intellect. The intellect is the village idiot compared with expanded awareness. Mm-hmm. But the new psyche has turned the intellect, very, very limited level of perception, into the goal to pursue, to become clever, to become fated for your intelligence. Virtually no cutting edge stuff goes on now within the institutions of the state. It's all going on outside.
So if this is really happening, what would you say is the end goal of this? Why would humans be kept in this state intentionally, and by whom?
Well, by that force, which takes many forms, that the Gnostics called archons. Are
you saying that these are extraterrestrial entities?
Well, yes and no, in this sense. I say that this archontic force is actually a very, very imbalanced and distorted state of awareness, what the Gnostics called the formless ones. And
so not like our idea of what a god is,
No, a state of awareness. I mean, what happens in a near-death experience, which millions and millions of people have had now? the psyche, the state of awareness, the point of attention, leaves the body vehicle, which is the body is only a vehicle, like a biological computer system, to lock us into this ridiculously narrow band of frequencies that we call visible light. It's so small, it's insane. And when people leave the body, when the body dies, if you like, then they start processing information in a different way, because this biological computer is no longer processing it for them in a very limited way. And they suddenly describe over and over again these near-death experiences, how suddenly their awareness and their perception just expanded beyond anything they could even begin to describe, because they've left the vehicle, the biological computer, that focuses their attention through a human lifetime in a narrow band of frequencies. Why humanity thinks in such limited terms. So awareness is what we all are. And you can have a state of awareness that is massively expanded, or a state of awareness that's very, very limited, a state of awareness that comes from a state of love and benevolence, or you can have a distorted state of awareness, that what we call evil, what we call psychopathic. It's the state of awareness. A psychopath is a state of awareness that manifests as psychopathic behavior. What I'm saying is that this archontic force described by the Gnostics is actually in its base form a very, very distorted, imbalanced state of awareness, which we would, I think, accurately describe with the word psychopathic. Now, as the Gnostic writings describe, and as ancient cultures describe around the world, this force can take form. And it can take a reptilian form. It can take the form of what people call the greys. It can take infinite form. We live in an infinite reality of infinite possibility. It can take any form that you can imagine virtually. I mean, you look at the animal world and the insect world and the world of nature within this narrow band of frequency we call visible light, this infinitesimal little band of frequency. Look at the diversity. It's staggering. What the heck diversity of possibility exists outside of it? And we need to get past this idea that I say limits us, which is life can only take the form of someone with a head, a torso, 2 legs, and 2 arms. What is life? It's anything that is alive, and awareness is the life force. It's alive. And so the dynamic I'm suggesting in this new book is what is possessed, infiltrated, infested by this psyche, this deeply imbalanced psyche, will express that. So you have what you might call extraterrestrial groups that have great malevolence towards humanity, and extraterrestrial groups that have benevolence towards humanity. Like everything else, it's what is your perception? What is the state of awareness that's dictating your perceptions, thus your behavior? And I say that this archontic force has infiltrated and a number of non-human groups, most notably one that takes a reptilian form. And that is also part of this process of human control and human manipulation. And again, what I found fascinating is everything kind of connects to everything else. I don't know whether you've come across him. There was a man, he died recently in his 90s, called William Tompkins, who wrote a book in 2015 saying, and he does produce evidence to support what he says, that he was seconded in the 1940s into a naval intelligence operation in America based on the San Diego naval base, which was a top secret group formed to investigate and to interact with non-human entities and groups that were visiting the Earth. And what he said was that governments of the world, if you go deep enough into the shadows, are controlled by a reptilian race, which began its infiltration, as we know it today, 6,000 years ago. That's the time scale he puts on it. Now, of course, I've been writing about a reptilian race manipulating human society through these various structures I'm talking about since the 1990s. And it's a theme that you can pick up in ancient societies. The Zulus used to call them, still do, the shamanistic stream, the Chitahuri, or the children of the serpent, or the devastators is another description of them.
Well, there's certainly a lot of mythology around the snake or the serpent.
Yes, and it's interesting how the mythology of the snake and the symbolism of the snake, again, and the reptile, again and again, is associated with royalty. And when people look at the books, they'll see that I've pointed out or said that these royal bloodlines came from the perception of being special, of being the bloodline of the gods, if you like. And these bloodlines that I say are the controlling force of this new psyche are actually a hybrid that is representing this force within human society. And so they ended up, first of all, as rulers through royalty. The Chinese emperors claim the right to rule because of their genetic descendants from the serpent gods. You find this theme all over Central America, South America, everywhere, Africa. And that when the people started to rebel against in-your-face royal dictatorship, and were not having it anymore, then these bloodlines went in. There are still some, like the bloodline of the Windsors in Britain, which staggeringly are still head of state in America and New Zealand, pinches itself. Can't be true. It is madness. But most of them went into what I call the dark suit professions. They went into politics. They went into banking. They went into corporations today. And so you've got this web, this network that is actually dictating the corporations. They own and control the internet corporations, the banking corporations, the food producing corporations, and so on. They are and have been throughout on an incessant process of centralization of power, because compared with the 7.5 billion of the human population today, this network of manipulation, this bloodline network, is tiny. It's absolutely tiny. So what they've had to do to gain more and more power is to centralize and centralize and centralize power incessantly. That's what globalization is about. That's why of the 100 biggest economies in the world now, 51 are corporations. And this is what the European Union is about, the centralization of power in the hands of a few bureaucrats over the virtual entirety of Europe and its population. This is why I've said in the book since the 90s, and it's happening in front of us now, we are going to move, sorry, I've got this camera, we are moving towards the ultimate goal of a world government, a world central bank, a world army, and crucially, a microchipped population connected to technology. Now, I've been writing this since the 1990s, that this was the plan to go to the next stage. That what you said earlier, where is this leading?
Well, that was going to be my next question. What do you think is really the future? What's your view about what's going to happen next?
Well, you don't even have to ask me. Ask those people in Silicon Valley, what I call the devil's playground, because that's where the world is now being controlled from. And that's where it's being directed from, or being directed through, more like, rather than from. This reptilian race is obsessed with technology. This archaic reptilian race, as I would call it, expression of this imbalanced, distorted psyche, is obsessed with technology. And it's very advanced compared with humans in its knowledge of technology. And what it has been doing is manipulating humanity towards a point where we build our own technological prison, which we are then connected to via transhumanist technology that gives our entire, eventually, mind away, our thought processes away, our perceptions away, to artificial intelligence. And if anyone has not researched this, they might listen to what I'm saying now and go, hey, he's making that up. Well, actually, I'm not. I am quoting major figures from Silicon Valley, like Ray Kurzweil, the Google executive, who's one of the global sales pitchers for Frankenstein, who is talking about the human brain being technologically connected to what he calls the cloud, artificial intelligence, by 2030. Then you have all these other Silicon Valley people like Elon Musk saying how dangerous that is, but opening a company called Neuralink to connect the brain to artificial intelligence. And it's being driven globally out of America by one of the most, perhaps even the most sinister organization on earth, called DARPA, which is the technological development arm of the Pentagon. And I'll give you one personification of the connection between DARPA and Silicon Valley. There was called it'll come to me anyway. It's a lady who worked for DARPA. She was the head of DARPA. The technical development arm of the Pentagon. She then had this extraordinary, Regina Duggan, her name is, and she's then this extraordinary career move and becomes an executive of Google. What? She then makes a career move and becomes an executive of Facebook with the focus on creating transhumanist connections between technology and the human brain. And people think Google is just a search engine. They think that Facebook is just a social media platform. They're not. They are fundamentally involved, driven by DARPA in the background, in the development of this technology and this global grid, which they call the smart grid, and Kurzweil calls the cloud, that is designed to connect the human brain to artificial intelligence via transhumanist technology. And the idea, and Kurzweil said this publicly, the idea is that once that connection is in place, then AI do more and more of human thinking until there's no human thinking left. Now, why are they saying this openly? Because their sales pitch is gonna be fantastic. It will make humans superhuman. Human. That is the idea. The idea is to connect the human brain, the human perceptual processes to AI. And so what we call human now will be gone. And another part of that, and the technology already exists, you can read about it in the mainstream, is to memories of people. So they have no memory as before. So you basically create a year zero.